want to thank you for coming in. We invited your opponent to come as well, but he declined to come. We wanted to proceed because we think it's important for readers to hear from candidates as much as possible, and we feel like this is important for democracy that we talk to people who are running to represent us. So thank you so much for coming.
I agree with you.
Yeah. Well, we're glad you do. So like we have some reader questions that we're going to pepper into our conversation, but like clearly a lot of people are going through economic turmoil right now in their lives, and there's projections that there's going to be a recession next year. What would you do to help shore up Ohio families if there is a recession, and generally, how can you help us through this hard economy?
A tax cut. We hear it everywhere that we go. You know, we've been to all 88 counties. We're going everywhere. You can be a home health care worker. You can be a construction worker. The gas prices are crushing people. In food and general supply chain stuff. But to me, it's like you got to put money in people's pockets right now. And I've been saying this for a year and a half. Like, you know, inflation is a global problem. It is a little bit better here than it is in other places. But that does not eliminate the fact that people are being hurt. So, you know, straight tax cut, do what we did like with the child tax credit, advance it. Earned income tax credit, advance it. And then a general tax cut. And even for small businesses, I just think nobody did anything wrong. Yes, wages are up. Yes, unemployment is low, but it's still like, and I think that's where a lot of political people get in trouble. They're like, well, the fundamentals of the economy are good, right? The unemployment's low, wages are up. But it doesn't like hit the ground because people are hurting. And I think a tax cut would be the quickest way to help. And then in the mid to long term, kind of do what we're doing with reshoring and that, and I'm sure we'll get into that later.
How would the tax cut look?
I think you do the child tax credit that we had in place. I mean, families were getting significant money, you know, $250 to $300 a kid. I mean, that would go a long way into cushioning the blow. I think the same with the earned income tax credit, so low income earners are able to get that tax credit too, and I think you advance it and start putting it in their bank account so they have it for gas and food. And then I think a general tax cut for workers. I mean, even if you don't have kids or maybe you're doing okay, you still need some relief. And we're not going to need to do it forever, but I think in the short term we should be able to do it, and I think we can pay for it by asking the wealthiest people in the country to pay a little bit more too. So it could be budget neutral in that regard. But those would be like 2 or 3 of the ways that I would do it.
Okay.
Housing affordability is a concern for many Ohioans, kind of piggybacking on Amelia, especially with rising interest rates making it more difficult to buy a home. What policies would you support to encourage a broad range of housing options for Ohioans?
From the federal perspective, there's only pretty much 2 levers you have to pull. One, more housing, which you know we could put money into and work with Secretary Fudge, and we've been doing that. But I think that the main way to do it is a really robust expansion of the low-income housing tax credit. You have to make the housing profitable. I mean, that's the whole reason the tax cut came into existence. I just think it needs to be expanded. The problem, so that's like from the federal part, like allow builders to make money, you know, and if you have to keep the costs low, you need a pretty significant tax credit for them to be able to make the investment. And it's a good way for the public and private sector to try to address this problem. The other issue, which is not, you know, in my jurisdiction, is how local governments handle housing and zoning and what they do. And that's a big part of it. I mean, you see in California, for example, people don't want low-income housing in their neighborhood, and so the zoning doesn't change, and so that's what's driving up the cost of everything else. So you have to have a coordinated effort on the ground too. But from our perspective, I'm all in on, like, this is a national disgrace what's happening here. When you see tent cities and you see people, the level of homelessness, I just think it's a disgraceful thing. And we should have a robust response from the federal government, and any incentives we could maybe include. And you know, I don't have an answer right now on how that would work, but how do you sit down with the Mayor's Association and the township associations and like figure out what that needs to look like, and are there any federal incentives that we could also include in that? But the fact that we have people in our big cities that can't afford to have a home and living in their cars and working, it's like those aren't our values and as a country. And it's all, you hear from a lot of people, the kind of the right wing is like, people need to go to work and they need to like pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and like they are working. And in some of these cities too, where people are driving like 2 hours to get into work. And I mean, the big San Francisco, LA, you can't afford to even live in the city. And so now you're 4 hours on the road, and then you're not watching your kids. And then, it's just kind of the societal effect is significant. So from the federal perspective, that's what I do.
On the flip side of that, too, you have people like in Columbus who have jobs. Like Columbus is a shining example, like the spotlight in Ohio, where it's like the economy is better. So you do have people with good jobs who still can't afford housing. How do you stop places like Columbus from becoming San Francisco, where like you can't even with nice incomes have a house, and it kind of goes into like the American dream. You can't have the American dream no matter how much you earn because of the housing shortage stock.
Yeah. Again, I think what I just said is part of it. And I think the pandemic hurt that, the supply chains hurt that, because then the costs are going up. And that's why housing prices are staying up now, is because supply is still down. I mean, you go out to Dublin, it's like, oh my God, like it's just, they continue to try to build, and they still can't keep up. And so I think it says a lot. It's a very high class problem in Columbus. I mean, coming from Youngstown, like people aren't developing like they are in Dublin or some of these other areas. And so, I think part of it, I talk a lot about like, how do we have an industrial policy in the country? And I had this conversation with the CEO of Intel when the whole chips thing was going down. And we landed it, and they announced it, but we're still waiting for the CHIPS Act to pass. So what I said to him was, how do we work with you? You have these 30 or 40 suppliers that are coming in. How do we work with you from a public policy perspective? If those suppliers don't need to be next to the fab in Licking County, how do we help you locate them in Portsmouth, in Chillicothe, in Marietta, in Youngstown, like to relieve some of the pressure from here? Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of the problem. I had a study too, a study in DC, just so you kind of know my mindset on these kind of things. How do we move some of these federal jobs from DC out into the heartland? Department of Ag should have, I'm not saying the whole thing, I'm saying maybe an agency with 1,000 people. Put it in Toledo, put it in, and so, because that's the problem in DC. You have all these jobs, traffic, can't keep up, housing prices. So it needs to be more of a federal and state strategy on how do you rebuild some of these forgotten communities. But here's the other side of that is, you go to Marietta, there's no broadband. They don't have necessarily the kind of water system you need. They don't have a robust joint vocational program. They don't have shop class. They don't have people that could move into those jobs just yet. And so we've got to sit down, and I talk a lot about an age of reform. We need to move into an age of reform because we have to think about these things in a much different way. And this is why you can't be completely hostile to the business community either. I tell people you can be hostile to greed, hostile to income inequality, hostile to a concentration of wealth, and we need to fix those things. But you can't be hostile to business, because if we're going to sit down and fix this problem, it's like, okay, Intel, how do we sit down? How can we all be a part of the solution here? And then how does the state government target investments into these communities that will eventually lead to growth and relieve the pressure, which will bring down the housing costs here. It'll relieve the burden of infrastructure costs in this area, because it'll be shared growth, shared prosperity. And then you're taking communities that are, have high unemployment and low wages, and you'll start to lift them up, and then they'll have money to be able to vote for school levies and mental health levies and library levies and police and fire levies to start lifting themselves up too. But it's got to be a shift in mindset. So there's no silver bullet. I don't have a magic wand on it, but I think that's kind of where we need to start moving and thinking as a culture and as a society.
That's interesting.
I have a question. When people look at Congress, they think it's broken. Politics is is getting in the
They
way.
should see it from up close.
Well, I'm very you know, can't get anything done, gridlock, that sort of thing. So, and clearly going into the Senate. So talk to us a little bit about how, if you were elected, how would you work across the aisle? How would, you know, how important is bipartisanship? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, critical, I think, from a lot of different levels. I'm proud of the fact that Georgetown University has done, you know, an analysis of Congress. The last two Congresses, I've been in the top 10% of most bipartisan people in Congress. In Ohio, I was behind Steve Stivers when he was in as number 2, and now it's Anthony Gonzalez who's number 1, and I'm number 2 in Ohio. So I'm proud of that. I think it's essential. I just don't think there's any other way to do it, because you have to reach across the aisle if you're going to do something that's sustainable. And the frustration for me, and I think for the country, a lot of Americans, is like, oh, the Democrats get in, they pass something, and they go all in on their agenda. Then the Republicans get in, they undo everything the Democrats did, and they implement their agenda. And it's just this back and forth where there's not a sustained strategy that's an American strategy. And I use the example of the Cold War. Like, we had a Cold War strategy against the Soviet Union, and it could have been Eisenhower, Kennedy, Nixon, Carter, Reagan. It was like the same strategy. That was the American strategy. And I think for our economy, for our foreign policy, like, we have to get back to where, like, there was just a sustained, like, and an agreed upon way to go about things. Like, when President Kennedy was in, they were having a recession, he was talking about a tax cut. He kept saying, we need a tax cut. And it was like, and he couldn't get it passed, but here's a Democratic president saying, no, this is Keynesian economics. This is like, economy gets soft, you pass a tax cut. It wasn't a Democrat or Republican thing. It was just, this is the economic approach post-World War II, post the Depression. I just think we need something like that in a bipartisan way on energy, you know, on workforce development, on infrastructure, you know, on like things like the CHIPS Act, which was bipartisan. The infrastructure bill was bipartisan. The Inflation Reduction Act was not, but again, it pulled Manchin and Sinema. So it, you know, even within the Democrats, we were able to build some level of consensus. So I just think we need a big strategy. And I think we need politicians that are running for office like I am trying to do now, say, like, okay, what is that strategy? And I talk about energy. And I talked about this yesterday. I was with the kids at Ohio State. I mean, they're kids to me now. I'm going to be 50. But I was just saying, like, here's a strategy on energy. Now, no pollster would tell you to go to college kids and talk about this. But I said, we got to go all in on natural gas. Like, that's the bridge, right? That's the bridge. Natural gas. We've had the highest, this is just an example of like what I'm talking about. From 2005 to 2019, the country that had the largest carbon reduction in the world was the United States, because we went from coal to natural gas. And it was significant. Now we have Europe, because of what's going on with Putin, moving more towards coal again. We have China building 1 coal-fired power plant a week in China. Like, that's not a recipe for addressing climate change. So when I was talking to the students, I said, natural gas, increase production here, create jobs in Appalachia, Eastern Ohio, liquefy it, get it out through the ports, ship it to Europe, eventually, hopefully, ship it to China. If the cost is right, they'll buy it. And we can reduce global emissions in the next 10 to 15 years by 75%, which is a huge step in the right direction, while we go all in on wind and solar and nuclear and hydrogen and whatever else, like, are really, you know, we do what America does, like, go all in on that. And the reason I'm using that as an example is because I think that could be a common sense solution to our energy, in a long-term strategy for our energy issues. And if Democrats pass that and Republicans come in, they're going to keep most of that. Maybe they'll pare it back a little bit on the you know, renewable piece, but, you know, then you have an alliance, 2 on that, with the building and construction trade unions. You have a real kind of, you have a policy that has support from all quarters. And I just want us to start thinking that way.
But you've raised, you gave like 3 examples of broad areas that you think that there could be consensus on. Give me another example on something specific in one of those areas, whether it's infrastructure or whatever, that you think really that you can get consensus. Because, there's, even for natural gas, there is disagreement.
Yeah.
As it relates.
Yeah. Well, I do think that if we make the case on it, that would be something that we could pass. I think, the building and construction trade unions, which have influence within the Democratic Party, could say, look, this needs to be a part of the agenda, because they're also for, building buildings in a different way, and because that's construction jobs. The electrical workers love the electric vehicle piece with, the charging stations and all of that. So they're going to be, a big part of it. So I think the key is building that political coalition. I think we saw it with the infrastructure bill, and credit to Senator Portman for being a part of that solution, which J.D. Vance is against. I think the same thing with the CHIPS Act. That's an industrial policy that I think we could probably do that for artificial intelligence. We could probably do that for, we are doing that with the Inflation Reduction Act to some extent and some of these other areas. But I think we're hitting a critical mass point here, because workers are starting to see the jobs coming in the renewable energy sector. And so I think it will be easier to put these coalitions together. It takes work, and I think it takes a culture shift. This will be the last thing I say on it, unless you ask me another question, because you're all in charge here. There's a business saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's all the business schools. This is like their mantra. And I think from a political perspective, culture eats policy for breakfast. Like, you can have the 10-point plan, you can have the policy. If the culture is going in another direction, it doesn't matter. But if the culture, which I think the culture is shifting now, I think the culture is burnt out, exhausted, and they're ready for some compromise and to get stuff done, leave the age of stupidity behind us and move into an age of possibility, an age of reconciliation, an age of reform, that the culture will back that up. And I hope that after this election, we'll start seeing it. But 2 out of the 3 big bills we did were bipartisan, which is not insignificant in this environment.
Along those same lines, so we solicited questions from readers. We got like 200 questions for you and J.D. Vance, and he's not here to answer questions that were meant for him. But since you are...
Can I answer his for him?
You want to? Never mind. A doctor, I guess he's a dentist, William Rance from Loveland, he wanted to know if you are willing to stand up to your party and assumingly work with Republicans. Why do you support abolishing the filibuster in the Senate? And he said that sounds like a very partisan move on your part and is an effort that would silence Republicans.
So first question, as I share with everybody, like I 4 or 5 years ago ran against Leader Pelosi. And anybody who knows anything about Washington knows that you don't take on your own leadership without consequences. and I did, and I did it because I was frustrated with our leadership nationally. President Trump had won. I think Democrats lost touch with working people, not just white workers. I think white, black, brown, like men, women, gay, straight, lost our focus on those really important economic issues. But the point is, I did it. And the point is, I am in the top 10% of most bipartisan. And I have, went against, President Obama when he was trying to do TPP. And they were trying to do fast track authority. Nothing personal. It was just, I felt like it was bad for my district, bad for Ohio. So I stood up to him. I was on the whip team in the House against fast track. And we won. And the same with President Biden, and again, JD's trying to run these commercials, oh, Tim loves Nancy Pelosi. And my response in the debate was I don't have to hate anybody to disagree. I think that's the problem. That's the problem, like, I'm trying to solve with this campaign. I don't hate J.D. Vance. I don't hate Trump. I don't want to hate anybody. Hate's a poison to yourself, not to the person you're hating. And so that's just not how I roll. And but I will stand firm on something that I believe in, and I will have the guts to take on my own party, unlike J.D. Vance, who, as we all know, got his dignity taken from him when he was in Youngstown, Ohio, and got back up on the stage to shake a guy's hand who just dismantled him in front of the world. Like, I don't do that. But I don't also have to hate anybody. Like, where I come from, you have a disagreement, you look them in the eye, you express your disagreements, and you shake hands and you go get a beer. And you go watch the Browns lose, or it's like, it's like, hey man, me too. But, and then the other question was on the filibuster. The Senate's the only it's not a partisan thing at all, because there will be a time when Democrats may not be in charge. I just think the rules of you need 60 votes to pass something in the United States Senate. It's the only legislative body in the country where you need 60 votes out of 100 or 60% to even move anything. And I just think that that's a huge disadvantage for us as a country. I think we need to modernize the Senate. We need to modernize the government and the ability for us to maneuver around policy initiatives. I think, even like we saw with the Inflation Reduction Act, even if one party controls, you still have a Joe Manchin, you still have a Kirsten Sinema, you still have people who are moderate to conservative. You still have to build a coalition, especially in this day and age. If you have over 50 votes in the Senate, you're going to have some diversity. There's also built-in checks. You still need to have the House, you still need to have the Senate, and you need to have the presidency too, because if we were able to do this, or Republicans were able to do it, Biden would have been president, or Trump would have been president. They would still have veto power. I still think there are built-in checks and balances, even if you get rid of the filibuster. And I just think, like, if China wants to move on some plan, it's like there's a consensus, we're moving, and they're off and running, and we're sitting here polarized. And last thing I'll say about it is the advantage right now, like, the only thing really the modern Republican Party has done is pass tax cuts and appoint judges. And in both of those, you can do with 51 votes. So if you want to cut taxes for rich people and pass really conservative judges from the Federalist Society that stacked the court, that gave us Dobbs, and now wants to move to nullifying same-sex marriages and nullifying birth control, like, they're doing that already. But if you want to pass policy initiatives on education or something else, you need 60 votes. It's like, okay, it's already stacked towards the party who wants to cut taxes and nominate Federalist Society judges. So I think it would bring a level of fairness to these other areas that are important.
I have another question from a reader. His name is Scott Dasher of Painesville, and he's asking, what plans do you have to help Ohio with mental health issues, and especially for children with mental disabilities?
Great question. We passed mental health parity a few years back, which puts mental health care on par with physical health care. And I'm co-chair of the House Addiction Treatment and Recovery Caucus, and there oftentimes there's a huge overlap with mental health issues and addiction issues, depression issues and addiction issues. So we've been working on this a long time, especially with veterans. That was a big win to have parity, but it's still not being implemented by the insurance companies the way it should be, and that's a huge problem. I think this starts with a national conversation. Again, this is a national tragedy. We see deaths of despair with teen suicide. We see it with addiction issues, self-medication, depression, the pandemic. This was all very apparent before the pandemic. Now it's worse because you threw into that a lot of isolation, which only makes those matters worse. So we need a national discussion on this. We need to make sure that the private insurance companies are able to, like, they do what they're supposed to do by law, and that's provide those mental health care. And we also need to build out a pipeline. So again, whole of government approach. And I'm just quarter step back just to say, like, all of these issues that we've been talking about, like, this is why I put in almost every commercial, we have to stop the stupid fights. Like, it's killing the country because we have to sit down and say, mental health, how do we do it? There's no, like, we're going to pass this law. It has to be like, okay, we have mental health parity. We have to do this whole other thing around building out the mental health workforce. So when we travel in rural Ohio, we see in Athens County, Meigs County, like, counselors will graduate from Ohio University. There's a deep need in rural Ohio for mental health care. People leave and come to Columbus because they're going to start off making 45 grand as opposed to 33 grand or whatever the numbers are. So they're going to graduate with probably a little bit of debt, and they're going to have to go to the city. And that's draining the capacity in rural areas. So we need a governmental incentive program to encourage people to stay in these small towns and rural areas, because that's where a lot of the issues are. Throwing that, the opiates, heroin, and now fentanyl. It's really a complicated thing. So you've got to do those two things. And then I think, again, reimagining what our education system looks like, and recognizing that if we don't start with the foundation of trauma-informed care for our kids, we are not going to be a great country in a generation, because the issue, I think, around a lot of the mental health is trauma. These kids are in tough homes, tough neighborhoods. You know, all the data we have now around adverse childhood experiences, that for every adverse childhood experience, the chances of them smoking, drinking, addiction, mental health issues, going to prison, like, all go up based on how many domestic violence incidents have you seen, how many, gunshots have you heard, how many whatever, divorce, family issues, just goes up. So building an education system around that understanding, I think, is going to be really important. The resources have to be there. The local school districts don't have that, and I think we have to step in to where we got to make sure you're building a workforce for rural areas, making sure our schools have the psychologists that they need, the counseling that they need, but then redesigning the curriculum too. And I've been a huge advocate throughout my career for social and emotional learning, trauma-informed care, like, just embedding that from the very beginning for our kids, and making sure they have the resources that they need. I think the other piece is diet. We're learning more and more every day about the connection between what foods these kids are eating and the connection between, they're starting to call your gut your second brain, because of our understanding now of eating these highly processed food, way too much sugar, and its effect on your mental health. And so we have to, like, completely reimagine the way we feed our kids in the schools. And so, again, stop the stupid fight so we can sit down and have a conversation. And all of these answers aren't going to be the liberal answer or the progressive answer. There's going to be some conservative answers there, like, how do we do this? And when you realize, if we make these early investments, that we're going to save a lot of money, because these kids aren't going to go to prison, which is $40,000 a year.
Do you see any reduction in the stigma around the conversation? It used to be somebody's an addict, then it's like, well, those junkies and all of that. And in your work with the caucus.
Yeah. I think it's shifting. I think, with the mental health piece, I think some of these, Kevin Love, who plays for the Cavaliers, like, these athletes and artists who are coming out and trying to provide some cover for people to say, I forget the name of the young Olympian gymnast. Simone. Yeah, of her, just saying, like, look at me. I'm supposed to be, like, immune to this stuff, and it's affecting me. So I think that, and that's what I'm saying. Like, how do we build a national kind of policy campaign around it's okay, but it's not just to say, okay, it's okay. Then what do I do? Like, I don't have anywhere to go. I'm living in Meigs County, and there's nobody here for me. There's a great guy. He's become a very, very good friend of mine, Dale King. He's in Portsmouth. He's a veteran. Did 2 tours, and he has a gym where he in Portsmouth, right downtown, and he does high intensity workout. But he, because of Portsmouth, he started hiring recovering addicts into his gym and he's got another business where he makes soap and deodorant and stuff. It's a really cool thing. But he started hiring people because he is saying, like, these people need help, and I'm going to use my business as an opportunity to help these people. And that's like the kind of thing that we need to do, is say, like, you need to take a chance. These folks need help, and they're starting to figure out that the high intensity workouts kind of stimulate your brain. And I've done them. They're not like my favorite thing to do. But they stimulate your brain in the same way that drugs do. And so it helps these people get through kind of the tough spots of recovery. So those kind of things, but again, it starts with a broader conversation.
But the whole thing is about, like, how we think of ourselves too as Americans, like all this polarization and all this, talk about the dumb stuff people are doing and changing the narrative. This question, I think, kind of speaks to that, but maybe not. It's from Dawn Petty from Newark, and she wants to know, a lot of people ask the same question: do you believe democracy is at risk in the United States? Why or why not?
I do. I don't think anybody can watch what happened on January 6th and not be scared to death about what could have happened and what may still happen. You know, I think you watch some of these rallies with these extremists and the whole, idea that the political leaders in the Republican Party have completely collapsed and will not stand up to that. So I'm very, very worried about it, and I want to make sure everybody knows that I'm worried about it, and I think it's important. And I was there on January 6th. My committee funds the United States Capitol Police. Those guys are my friends. And to have J.D. Vance raise money for the insurrectionists, which he did through his social media. He said, we got to help these guys out, send them money. One of the guys he tried to help got 4 years in prison. Like, is that who you want Ohio senator to be? Like, that's scary, like, that he would get in bed with these guys. And we were watching, my wife and I were watching last week, the Holocaust in the U.S. I don't know if you've seen this with Ken Burns. It's new, but it's really powerful. But anyway, the point, during one of the episodes, there was Roosevelt, I think it was Charles Lindbergh, who was kind of leading the whole kind of fascism in America, anti getting into the war. And there was Wendell Willkie, who was a Republican. And the kind of fascist element and the SS people in the United States were trying to, like, go after FDR. And Wendell Willkie condemned them, absolutely annihilated them. You are a danger to our democracy. And he went after them. And I'm sitting there with my wife. I said, here's FDR, Charles Lindbergh, and Wendell Willkie. And do you know who the most important person in this story is? Wendell Willkie. Because he took them on. Now, he could have said, these guys can help me politically get elected, And he didn't. He had courage. He took them on. I mean, that's Liz Cheney right now. That's Adam Kinzinger right now. And so to see JD, to see Kevin McCarthy, to see Ted Cruz and these guys just kind of go in with that element is really scary. And I think Ohioans need to recognize that this is a very serious moment. You send a guy like J.D. Vance to the Senate, those are his guys. I mean, we tell our kids all the time, you are the sum total of the 5 people that you hang out with the most. And he's got Tom Cotton, Ted Cruz, Ron DeSantis, Lindsey Graham, and Donald Trump Jr. in town for him. Now, what's that character look like? Who's the sum total of those 5 people? I don't think it's somebody Ohio wants to send to the Senate.
Aside from, like, those sort of things, the voting kind of things, are there other things you think the average American should be doing to support democracy? Because obviously, we love democracy here. Like, especially that, we really love the Constitution. We love the First Amendment. We love all our rights. Are there other things you think that Americans should be doing to help support democracy?
Yeah, I mean, I just think re-engaging in citizenship. I think we need a whole new, going back to our reimagining the schools, and my wife Andrea is teacher for 20 years, talks about this all the time, as a renewed commitment to civics education. I think trying as citizens, we need a new commitment to citizenship. There's no way out of this unless we have that, where we can actually have some conversations with people without feeling like we have to hate them. Trying to move out of a era of fear into an era of more hopefulness. Each person has to do that in their own way and in their own little network that they have. Obviously voting and repudiating, like having the courage to stand up. Like, it's not just about voting, but it's about just saying, look, this is wrong. This is wrong. I'm a Republican. This is why, I have more admiration for these courageous Republicans who stand up, and a lot of them are helping me too. Senator Portman's former chief of staff, John Bridgeland, is doing, we have this whole Republicans for Ryan thing. His boss is with J.D. Vance, but he's with me, because he has courage. Other Republicans who come to our events are just we can't do this. That level of, that's citizenship, not because it's me. Of course I like it. It's me, it's my election, help me out, help me win. But it signals that I'm willing to do the right thing. I don't agree with Tim Ryan all the time, but he's not raising money for the insurrectionists. I'm not with Tim Ryan all the time. He's not running around with the guy who wants to ban books. Those two things are a lot more important to me than my marginal tax rate, and I think that's what citizens need to do, is really to have the courage to be able to stand up. And I've been telling people to do this forever, don't just watch one network. Don't just get one stream of information, the documentary, the Social Dilemma, if you've seen it on Netflix. It's all about how these algorithms get you to go down a rabbit hole of views, to where the only, a year in, the only thing you get is one view. Turn on, get these different opinions, and we need to start encouraging that in our schools. So I don't have any one I think service is a big thing that we could do. I would like to see us move into a very robust national service program, where you get people from different neighborhoods and different political views doing service in communities in big and small ways. I think that can begin to break down some of these barriers, because everybody's in their silo now. My buddy says, he says, we all used to sit on the front porch, and see what was going on in the neighborhood, and now we're all on our back patio, on our deck, and there's no interaction. So anything we can do to encourage that, I think, is important.
Now we have Mary and Ray on the camera as well. Do you guys have any questions?
Did you want to get into reader
Yeah.
questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I was just going to read one that was from Northeast Ohio. There's a Jose Ortiz of Youngstown, and he's asking, what will you do to protect gun rights in Ohio?
Yeah. So, I'm a hunter. I don't hunt a lot, but I do hunt. We hunt with, I usually hunt with our oldest son, Mason, who is a much better shot than I am, and will gladly share that with anybody who will listen. But it's one of the great, it's one of the great days of the year for us, that we get to really hang out, and usually go down a day early somewhere and watch some football, and then get up early the next morning. And so none of this is about taking away, a lawful gun owner's rights. This is about closing loopholes. This is about making sure weapons of war aren't on the streets. This is about, the gun show loophole, and keeping these things out of the hands of criminals. And to me, that's should be a general consensus, because 70, 80, if not 90% of gun owners believe that as well. But I don't think there's anybody that wants to take anybody's, hunting rifle from them. I certainly don't, and would not be for that. I would fight that. But I do think when you look at the level of crime that's happening, and you look at the number of guns that are being used and how many people in our communities are living in fear, how you could not have a basic background check on people. And I think what they're doing in Ohio too, with the, reducing the training and the permitting that the FOP is against, like, it's clearly moving in the wrong direction.
Do you see any, at the federal level, do you see any movement on closing some of these loopholes or other I know we just passed gun legislation not
Yeah.
long ago, but some people think it did not go far enough.
Yeah.
So what do you see kind of going forward?
Again, I think, if we have some more votes in the Senate, we could pass, if we hold the House, I think we could pass closing the gun show loophole, providing more robust background checks, especially with the technology we have today. There's no excuse why you can say, well, they're at a gun show, we can't get, can't run a background check. It's like, well, that's not a good reason right now. And so I would think if we could, get a couple, numbers in the Senate, and we could be able to do more.
There are also a bunch of questions about abortion, obviously, and about like the Supreme Court and what that court should look like in the future, including one from, Elaine Lawrence from Logan. She wants to know, should a woman be forced by the government to carry a fetus to term? Obviously, you've been out, you've spoken out about that. So your thoughts on that are like out there, but can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, I think that what happened with the Dobbs decisions, the largest governmental overreach into the private lives of American citizens in the history of our lifetime. Complete violation of personal liberty and freedom, makes women second-class citizens, and it's very, very dangerous because the default position in some of these states is what we're dealing with here in Ohio, and we see the stories. Obviously, you all have published some of them, of the tragedies that women are going through, and that to me is like government, way too much big government in our bedrooms and our doctor's offices, and so I'm against it. This is, as your readers should know, this is exactly what J.D. Vance wanted. He celebrated this decision. He, said rape is inconvenient. He wants women to stay in violent marriages for the sake of the kids. Like, these are really, really, really dangerous and extreme positions. And so, I think we need, again, win some Senate seats here and codify Roe v. Wade, if the House stays the same, and make that law as opposed to case law, and reestablish that right. We had 50 years of it. We do not have the chaos that we have now, the danger that we have now, and this whole idea, of watching J.D. Vance say, incest and rape is like, the state-mandated forced pregnancy. That's the position, and they're not happy with, someone in Ohio who's having a tragic circumstance that has to go to Illinois. They want them to have to get a passport and go to Canada with a national ban. And in the last few days, and we started our day in Cleveland, and we met people from this group, and we ended our day in Dayton, and we met another, handful of people from this group of physicians in Ohio that are just so upset and scared that they're not going to be able to do their jobs. They do high-risk pregnancies, and this is the world that they live in every single day. And they can't take care of their patients. The one woman up in Cleveland the other day was like, I have kids myself, and now I have to worry that I may end up in prison because I'm trying to help a woman who's having a tragic circumstance with her pregnancy just because we found out in the eighth month. And so the concern is like, who is going to want to come into healthcare in Ohio? Who's going to want to, if you're looking from other states and you want to come to Ohio State or Case Western Reserve or, somewhere, you're going to say, I don't know. I don't want to do this in Ohio. The young people that we're trying to recruit to Ohio or to stay in Ohio to work at Intel or work in Foxconn up where we are building electric vehicles or solar industry in Toledo or whatever. It's like they're going to say, I don't want to raise my family here. I don't want to have a baby in Ohio. What if something goes wrong? it's terrible for business too. So it's not just a woman's issue. It's not just a healthcare issue. It has very broad-reaching ramifications.
I could reach back to something you said. You were talking about energy policy when you were talking to OSU students, and you briefly mentioned nuclear. Do you see that it would be wise to expand the use of nuclear power in the United States?
I do. I don't know quite how you get to our climate goals without nuclear. I mean, it's clean. And again, research, we need to do more research, but they're starting to come up with these smaller nuclear modules that, could power, parts of cities. And I think if we're worried about carbon, that nuclear needs to be on the agenda.
Okay. Anybody else got any quick questions? If not, I'll ask the Intel question I have on my mind.
Can't do this paper and not do Intel,
Right.
right?
Intel and Honda and all the rest of them.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have some big announcements. Honda and Intel is the biggest one. What are you going to do to make sure that there's more Intels in Ohio, and also that it's not just, in Columbus? I represent the Columbus Dispatch, so I love Columbus to be prosperous, obviously, but Columbus can't be it, right?
Yeah.
How can you make sure that that's spread around the whole state, that benefits, our workers and brings folks here?
Yeah, you use the bully pulpit of being in the Senate to use the relationship that I will have with the Intel CEO and the suppliers who are coming in. Again, this is why you got to stop the stupid fights and have conversations about, okay, we need you to locate these suppliers around the state. We have so many forgotten communities that have great people, great culture, iconic cities for not just Ohio, but for the country, like Marietta and Portsmouth. Like, these are great communities. How do we work with the CEOs of these companies to say, okay, we got a supplier coming, we want to put it in Portsmouth. What does Portsmouth need? And how do we work with the governor, Jobs Ohio, to say, okay, if we want to land this thing in Portsmouth, then Portsmouth needs broadband, and they need infrastructure, and they need a workforce training or whatever. Like, we don't know. Each of those circumstances will have their own needs. That's why you got to be working together. And I would absolutely use my position in the Senate to do that. I would use the power of, I want to get on the Appropriations Committee when I get there, to be able to earmark money for these communities to be, we did the infrastructure bill, and the state has a lot of federal money, so we could build these partnerships out and just have a strategy. And I've talked to JP Nassif about this, who runs Job Ohio, who's a phenomenal guy. And so I would just take what we've done in my congressional district, where I was kind of quarterbacking things, but we had a great team around us. And we've had some real successes. We have 2 natural gas power plants there. We have a battery plant there. Foxconn bought the old Lordstown plant. We've got 5 new electric vehicles coming in there. Incubators that are spinning out, buying properties. And I just share that as an example of, it was all me working with the chamber, working with the Port Authority, working with the regional transportation organization, working with the Akron Port Authority, using new market tax credits, historic tax credits to redo downtown buildings. So the point is, there's nobody better or understands this stuff more than I do, as far as how we got to work together. And so being in the Senate, I think we could have a significant impact on creating that model on how we do this. And I think there could be a great new era of public-private partnerships on how these corporate CEOs show some real understanding in their social impact that they need to have. And they go to these areas, they could probably pay the workers a little bit less than they would pay them in Columbus. And the property costs are going to be a little bit less for square footage in Portsmouth or Youngstown or Marietta versus Columbus. There's a win all the way around. And so the economics are there for them too. And I would do my best to provide the leadership for that.
Is there an example of that you see in other states?
Not that I know of. I do know that people are looking to Ohio now. We saw this in Youngstown. It's $8 a square foot in Youngstown. We had a company move in from San Francisco, and they were paying like whatever, hundreds of dollars a square foot in San Francisco. They were paying their workers there $150,000 a year. They moved to, it's called Revere Data. It's been sold since and changed their name, but you know, they were paying young people in Youngstown 40 or 50 grand a year out of college. And so, you know, you graduate from YSU and you're making 50 grand, you're like, you hit the lottery. And so they won on the economics, our area won on the economics, the workers won on the economics, so it was like a win all the way around. And I think taking that idea and really using the Senate seat as a bully pulpit to be able to do that would be a lot of fun.
So, like, finally, is there anything else you want to say that we didn't ask you about that you think people need to know before they hit the
No, love to turn off the cameras, keep chatting.
Okay.
No, I'm kidding.
Well, she
No,
said
I
you
would.
gotta go, so-
Yeah, no, I know. I do. I would ask everybody for their vote. I would appreciate their support. I'm not asking anyone to sign up to be a Democrat. I'm asking people to sign up to be an American. I think people are coming to grips with the fact that this is a very, very serious office, a very, very serious race, with huge implications. And if you want, you know, another Ted Cruz in the Senate who's going to do nothing but try to burn the place down and go all in with the extremists, you got your guy with J.D. Vance. You want somebody who's pragmatic, from Ohio, never left. The last thing I'd like to say too, because I think it's important, if people only had like one data point on each of us, J.D. Vance has 2 donors, a Silicon Valley billionaire and Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell raises all his money from the biggest corporate interests in the country. They have rescued him to the tune of $55 million. We have 350,000 donors. 95% of our contributions are under $100. We are fueled by the average person who really cares about what's going on here. And I just think if people know that, like, I am going to be an independent actor. I don't have all the national Democrats coming in here to rescue me and throw money at me. We've built this on our own. I go to deep red counties. I talk to people who don't agree with me on everything. I've been to rural areas, to farms, to chambers of commerce in red communities that are very Republican, and try to find some common ground. And I think we need a leader that has the guts to go do that and say, because people said, why are you going to these red counties? Like, what's the matter with you? You know, go to the suburbs and go to the cities. And it's like, one, it's a moral issue. It's like, we have to represent these people too. They have addiction issues. They have mental health issues. They have economic issues. You know, they want some hope for their kids. And you can't leave them because they don't necessarily vote for you. Go get their vote. Go tell them what you're going to do for them. Go tell them you care about them. And we've done that. And I just think that's the kind of leader that Ohio wants. And you look at, you know, you look at John Glenn, you look at Voinovich, you look at Metzenbaum, you look at like the history of the state. It's not extreme like JD is. It's just not. And that's why we're going to win. So you heard it here. We're going to shock the world.